Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of Fidelis. It is me here with Lauren again. Last week we had a special guest, which is great, and this week I'm back, and we are talking about politics. And what made me consider discussing this week was a story some of you might have seen, or maybe some of you were even there, of a parish in Michigan in which there was an incident where a priest was talking about the recent shootings in Parkland, Florida. Someone in the middle of the church shouted that, so you think this is about gun control, and that caused this mass panic. And it got Lauren and I to discussing the role that politics plays in the church today. Some of you may have experienced this yourself, especially as some in the American church have become more politically influenced. This is something I feel like I've seen myself at various parishes that I've been to. At a recent parish that I attended, we no longer go there. But all through election season last year, we had a pastor that spoke nonstop about the upcoming election and the need to make sure we did not vote for the pro-abortion candidate. And over again, it was, don't vote for the pro-abortion candidate. There are two candidates running. One of them is rabidly pro-abortion. The other one is not. I can't tell you their names, but make sure you vote for the other candidate, which is kind of straddling the line of being inappropriate in and of itself. And then the Sunday before Election Day, we had someone pull a similar incident where in the middle of Mass, they shouted out, vote for Trump, which this is not to disparage anyone that supports Donald Trump. The point is, it's not appropriate to be doing something like that in the middle of Mass. So have you ever experienced something like that, Lauren?
I haven't experienced anything regarding Trump, and I am a Trump supporter for the record. But
yeah, I'm not knocking anyone's political views.
No, yeah, I just want people that are watching to know that, like, Cassie and I won't speak for Cassie, but like, I actually am a Trump supporter. But we did have a homily last year. Actually, it was kind of disappointing because Cassie and I are like super pro-life activists, and so I'm always like looking forward to Sanctity of Life Sunday, like we've talked about on Fidelis before. But the priest at the homily at a church I attended on Sanctity of Life Sunday last year made his whole homily about how the U.S. government needed to accept Syrian refugees, and how it would be wrong for Catholics to be opposed to that. And I thought that was inappropriate because that is a theological opinion. So to be preaching from the pulpit about what we should believe about politics was kind of disappointing. But it seems like this is becoming a little more common. Even when I follow the USCCB on Twitter, I see some things that are like borderline political, and I'm really, really hesitant to criticize our bishops or any priests. But I think it is a timely conversation to talk about the fact that we are seeing this more, and kind of like what the implications are and how the faithful can respond. Like, we don't have to feel that because a theological opinion is shared, that it is morally binding for us. And so we just wanted to have a conversation about kind of like, where do we draw the line? Where can we as Catholics discard or disregard something that a church leader has said, et cetera?
Right. And the first examples that we've given, the issue with the gun control outburst and homily, the example I have at my parish, and then with Lauren as well. The first thing I want to kind of mention is the problem with doing these things at the Mass. So to me, I felt that was incredibly inappropriate in all of these instances to bring in political issues into the Mass. I mean, that it doesn't belong there.
Right. Yeah, it seems like there's a disconnect a little bit, maybe, between Catholic teaching on certain issues. So there is certainly Catholic teaching on abortion and protecting the vulnerable and all these things, but when you cross over into actual legislation or political conversations, that's where it starts to get more murky. You absolutely can and should teach Catholic doctrine at a Catholic Mass, but it does seem to be getting a little bit like borderline inappropriate in some cases.
Yeah. And I think that it kind of speaks to the idea that people have forgotten or don't know or don't respect what the Mass is and what it's for. We're not there to discuss politics. I mean, really, none of that really matters in this specific context. During the Mass, we're supposed to be focusing on the sacrifice of Jesus and the fact that we're about to receive him. And so when we're talking about things like gun control or vote for, whoever, or, whatever other political issues someone wants to talk about, you're distracting away from what the Mass is supposed to really be about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's not that priests are told to like not offend people, because church teaching might be offensive. The point is exactly what you said, that there is a context for those conversations, and the Mass is not that place. And if you are using the homily to start a political conversation, you're really drawing the Mass, I think, in a direction that it's not intended to go. Because ultimately, the homily isn't the most important part of the Mass and shouldn't be where our attention stays for the rest of the Mass. The most important part of the Mass is the Eucharist. It's the consecration and receiving Holy Communion. And so, I think that's a really good point, Cassie.
And actually, this pastor at the same church that I mentioned, another good example would be even something that aligns with church teachings. He would speak a lot about same-sex marriage and the transgender movement. And he spoke about it at this particular time because it was an issue that was coming up in our city. Mm-hmm. So him speaking about same-sex marriage and how that you can't have same-sex marriage, that's certainly abiding by church teachings. But to me, I felt like, okay, but is the Mass really the best place to be discussing this?
I kind of feel for a priest who does feel like called to instruct the faithful on these issues, and probably feels as though if I don't use this hour of the Mass or this 20 minutes of the homily, these people are never going to hear this, because most people who are at Mass, that's their only contact with the Catholic faith or Catholic teaching throughout the week. I mean, only like 30% of Catholics in the US even go to Mass. And then of those, most of them are just people that go to Mass every Sunday and nothing else. So I kind of understand like the tension that's probably going on with the clergy. And in an ideal world, we would have people attending forums outside of the Mass to discuss get more into the church teaching. I mean, there are ministries where you can have conversations and Bible studies, but the fact of the matter is that most people don't go to them. So I can see how a priest would find himself in that situation where he's wrestling with like, do I let these people never hear anything about this subject that's really important? Or do I just stick to the scripture readings? And I'm not saying which one is right, but I can kind of see how you would get into that tension.
Right. And I think that part of the problem that we have with the increasing politics that are going on in the church is that it encourages divisions, because right now we have all of these issues right now in this country with people being very just angry all the time, and this country is very divided. And part of my fear is that when we start to bring politics into the church, that encourages those divisions within our parishes and then within the church.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's a very valid concern. And I think it'd be interesting to study, I always try to remember that the Catholic Church is global. It's a universal faith. It's not an American church. And I think that when we bring politics into it, we're kind of stooping to the level of government, and no government is perfect. No government is everlasting. And that's not the case with our faith. Our faith is perfect and our faith is eternal. And so when we kind of start to conflate politics and the Catholic faith, I think we're doing a disservice to the fundamentals of the structure of our faith. It's hard because we live in a society where Monday through Saturday, we are just bombarded with political messages. And especially since Trump since the Trump-Hillary campaign, basically, like, we've become obsessed with politics in the US, like to a probably unprecedented degree. But we have to be really careful. And I'm even seeing this with like the bishops. The bishops in Texas are doing some divisive political things right now too. And it's just really sad to see the church stooping to the level of politics when people need the hope of the Catholic faith more than the division of politics.
Yeah, and I wish that there was more, I guess, a more unifying message, because, I mean, when you have someone sitting there preaching a political message from the pulpit, there's going to be some people that agree with you. Yeah. There's going to be others that don't. Right. And what kind of message does that send to those people that disagree with you? Right. Because here's part of the problem. A lot of these political positions, they're not official church teachings. Mm-hmm. Right?
Right. Well, that's the whole problem.
Yeah, you're allowed to have different opinions on things. Mm-hmm. Like your example of the Syrian refugees. Mm-hmm. You can be a Catholic and want to bring Syrian refugees here. Mm-hmm. You can be a Catholic and think that it's too dangerous.
Right.
There's not a right answer. It's a complicated issue. There's not an easy solution to this. And even someone that, says, no, I feel like it's too dangerous. I'm worried. That doesn't mean that they are heartless. Right. And don't care about Syrian refugees, that they don't look at, the pictures of these children in hospitals, that it doesn't break their heart.
Right.
Or someone that does want to bring Syrian refugees here, it doesn't mean that they sit there and, well, I just don't care about what happens in the United States. I don't care about terrorist attacks. When we sit there and bring this up in the parish, one, it's alienating to whoever doesn't agree. It pushes those people away and it makes them think, well, am I not welcome here? And two, it assigns this moral position when there really isn't one.
Right.
Three, it makes it out to where it just, again, it's encouraging divisions. When, someone that disagrees with you, they're not evil or incompassionate or less Catholic than you.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the message that it sends.
On these issues of doctrine, I mean, I think on the issues of doctrine where we have theological opinions, like we have the theological opinion that we have to bring in refugees, or the opinion that we have to protect national security over bringing in refugees. People on both sides are using legitimate doctrine to argue for their position. But in reality, the Catholic Church hasn't made a proclamation about which position is more in line with the faith. And it might not even be a case where the church can or will do that, because it's so nuanced and that there is an argument for each side. So I think this would be a good point to just quickly go through like the difference between dogma, doctrine, and opinion, right, so that we can know how maybe we could respond when we hear something that doesn't sound right. So dogma is a divinely revealed truth that's proclaimed by the church as such. And the church proclaims this with infallible authority, which means that the church is not capable of being wrong when it makes this proclamation about divine revelation. The sun just decided to come out in my room, so you can't see me, that's why. And that dogma will be binding forever for all Catholics. So one example of dogma, I think, is the Immaculate Conception. Typically, dogma is proclaimed after there's like a controversy over some doctrine. That was the case with the Immaculate Conception back in the 1800s. We did a show about this in December if anyone wants to watch it. But the Pope came out and said, no, as a Catholic, you don't have the option to not believe in the Immaculate Conception. You have to believe in the Immaculate Conception. It's a divinely revealed truth. It's always going to be true, and all Catholics forever have to believe this. It's never going to change. Then there's doctrine, which doctrine is just the whole body of church teaching. And it also is infallible, but it hasn't been proclaimed from the chair as a dogma. So dogma is kind of like a subcategory of doctrine. Doctrine is just the whole body of church teaching. It's what you see in the catechism and whatnot. Then you have theological opinion, and that's kind of like the realm that we're conversing in right now. And this is an area, these are areas where we're free to believe or not believe a certain position, as long as, and this is a huge caveat, the position of theological opinion cannot conflict with church teaching. And that is where these conversations about gun control and immigration will come in. This isn't where conversations about abortion will come in. An opinion that abortion or women priests or gay marriage is okay, that would not be a valid theological opinion, because it would stand in direct opposition to stated unchangeable church teaching. But yeah, immigration and gun control and that kind of thing would fall into church theological opinion. John Paul II, for example, had the theological opinion that the death penalty was immoral, and that was based on a strong doctrinal backing, where he could see that the church has these teachings about the value of human life, and we have the ability to have prisoners be locked up forever, to where we don't need to administer capital punishment as a means of protecting the faithful. But that was a theological opinion, because the church actually does not have a doctrine that forbids capital punishment. Capital punishment is actually permissible in the Catholic Church. So these are areas that I think we have to distinguish. Is this a theological opinion? And if so, it has to not conflict with church teaching, but it may not necessarily be right. And I have to be willing to surrender an opinion that turns out to be wrong if the magisterium does come out at some point and say, this is the church teaching, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's exactly why some of these discussions can be so problematic, because there is a difference between something like abortion and something like gun control, or abortion and immigration, or abortion and pretty much all other political positions. Mm-hmm. Abortion is never going to be permissible in the Catholic Church. There is never any circumstance where abortion is permissible. But gun control is something where we're allowed to have different opinions.
Yeah.
Or immigration, we're allowed to have different opinions on these things. Mm-hmm. So when you have a priest speaking authoritatively, yeah, he's not getting up behind the pulpit and saying, this is the position of the Catholic Church, but the message that it sends is, kind of almost implies it a little bit. Mm-hmm. And it's also not just priests doing this. I see this a lot among, people on Facebook, for example, and so on, that, well, how can you be Catholic and support this? Or how can you be Catholic and vote for this person? How can you be Catholic and think that this is okay? And it's a very problematic point of view.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it stems from the fact that we view Catholicism as a version of American politics. I think this is a uniquely American, maybe Western, but I have a feeling that this isn't the way Catholicism is approached in Africa. You know what I mean? But we tend to translate these liberal and conservative labels to our faith. And we have to recognize that our faith transcends those labels. We might be a liberal or a conservative in politics, and that's okay, and still be a faithful practicing Catholic, as long as we're not saying that everyone else who doesn't share our label can't therefore be a good Catholic.
Right. And that's one of the things that really bothers me, is when I see people that will say, and to come up with another example, healthcare. Healthcare is a very divisive issue right now. And you have people that are very entrenched on their side. And, I'll see people that will say, well, healthcare is a basic right. It's a human right. People need it. How can you be Catholic and not support giving people, a human right? And it's not just that this encourages divisions. This could really push people away from the church when you do things like this, when you say things like this. And I'm not the type of person that, tends to run around saying we need to be charitable. I actually hate that word. I hate that word, charitable. Yeah. But this is an instance where we need to be charitable. Yes. We need to assume the best out of our fellow Catholics instead of the worst. Yeah. When you sit there and think, well, I support universal health care, this person doesn't. Why is it that today we don't see that as just a disagreement.
Yeah.
Today in our world, it seems like when someone disagrees with you, well, I support Donald Trump, I support Hillary Clinton, instead of thinking, well, that's just someone that has a different opinion and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's that this person is wrong and bad and evil, and they need to be, corrected and put in their place and made an example of, and just all of these very negative, divisive things, as opposed to, well, they disagree. That's all that it is. And now it's kind of infecting the church too, at least here in the United States.
Yeah, big time, big time. And it's really sad because the church is so much more beautiful than all these like political trends. And you know how the political trends, they go as fast as the news cycle. One day it's healthcare, the next day it's immigration, the next day it's gun control. And like if we're imposing that like frenetic pace on Catholic teaching, we're missing what the church is and has to offer.
Right. And that's something that I think that I know for me, I didn't really think much about this until a few years ago, but we forget that the church is more than just the United States. And I think that's kind of typical in general, not even just church specific. You live in the country you live in, this city you live in, this state, and that's kind of where your attention lies. So, you think about things that affect your city and your country. You don't think about what's going on in Austria today. So it's not like it's bad, but it's an easy cycle to fall into and to forget that the church, like you said, is bigger than this. Mm-hmm. The church is more than just the United States. Mm-hmm. It's global and it's above that. And we should be putting that above our political affiliations too.
Yeah. Yeah. And letting our faith inform our politics. And sometimes that's going to put us in an independent camp. That's going to put us in a position where we can't identify as Republican or Democrat because both sides are wrong, but we have to make sure that our allegiance is first and foremost to the teachings of the church. And that's really hard because the culture is telling us, label yourself politically. They don't care what your religious views are. And if you're forced into this corner where you're having to label yourself politically, it's really hard to have the humility to say, my political views have to be subject to my faith. And you might realize that your political view is at odds with your faith and have to have the humility to surrender that. And we've all probably been in that position at some point in our lives where our gut instinct toward politics turned out to be in conflict with our faith. And we had to say, okay, well, I know which one I have to put first in my life. But that's just something that in the American culture is very, very hard to do because you're either a Breitbart reader or you're a CNN fan, and there's not really any middle ground. And the church falls in that middle ground so often.
I think it's even more difficult now considering that so much of what the church stands for, opposing gay marriage, opposing abortion, is very not popular right now.
Yeah.
Especially considering that if you look in the media, for example, that we take a hard line stance on things like, say, abortion. It's never permissible. But if you go and try to make that argument with someone, hey, it's not permissible, even if you've been raped.
Yeah, right.
People do not want to hear that.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes it even harder because here, regardless of where you fall, there's going to be a group of people saying, no, it's okay, you're right.
Yeah.
And that is a very, very difficult allure to fight away from.
Yes.
It's difficult to fight when you have a bunch of people saying, oh, come over here. We think you're right. This difficult thing that you're grappling with, you can leave that alone.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, politics will be used to lure people out of their faith so often.
Yeah. And so another issue or thing that we can talk about is how do you know how do you use the faith to influence your political views, your political life and actions and everything? How do you do that?
Well, I mean, for me, it boils down to the precepts of the church. First of all, I have to ask myself if what I believe politically conflicts with any of those precepts or dogmas or doctrine. So I think really just trying to be well catechized and then squaring my political views with my catechesis on a regular basis and being willing to, I mean, it can be hard when I fall hard on the Republican conservative line, but it can be hard when I'm confronted with an issue like immigration, where I have a really strong political opinion, but I have to go and acknowledge, look, this is the body of doctrine. This is what we know about self-defense and national security, but this is what we know about serving immigrants, and being able to just have the humility and deference toward my faith to say, I can't necessarily align with my party or whatever 100% on every single issue, because I'm deferring first to catechesis. So, I mean, for me, it just comes down to not only the catechesis that I've had in the past, but being willing to do research into issues where my politics are getting strong and I'm not necessarily sure what the doctrine is on that, being willing to go and read the encyclicals and figure out if my political position squares with the church teaching.
I think that it also helps to have some humility, regardless of where you fall. That's something that's, I think, as you mentioned, very difficult today. And I can be perfectly honest, that's something that I've had to kind of come to terms with over the past 2 years, and me, myself.
Yeah.
Because I used to be much more of a hardliner on the conservative Republican side, especially on issues like immigration and refugees and things of that nature. And I had to kind of humble myself, because as time has gone on, I will learn more information. I'll say, oh, I was wrong about this.
Right, exactly.
And when I realize that I'm wrong about it, it forces me to confront something that, let's be honest, no one wants to confront that. Right. No one wants to step back and be like, oh, crap, I was wrong.
Yeah.
And now you have to reconsider things. So I think that it's important to maintain that humility within yourself. You can have a political viewpoint, but also just to be humble enough to keep an open mind, to at least hear the other person out, to be willing to continue reevaluating the facts. And honestly, I feel like if we did that, a lot of these divisions would go away.
Yes, absolutely. The faith is exactly what politics needs right now.
Yeah, and it's frustrating to me to see so many people that are letting their political views kind of come before their faith. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I don't know if it's like this in other countries, or I don't know if this is a uniquely American issue that we're having. I have no idea. Mm-hmm. But it's disappointing, and it's really difficult because, again, I mean, I keep saying this, but we're so divided right now as a country.
Yeah.
And it's affecting us in our parishes too. Yeah. And there's so much just thinking the worst of each other, thinking the worst out of someone because they disagree with you.
Yeah.
And when it comes and you're starting to think that, oh, well, they're not as good a Catholic as me because, they think we should bring refugees to the United States and that's dangerous and they don't care. It's a big problem. It's a really big problem. And it's something we really need to get away from. And I wish that our leaders in the church would do a better job of that.
Yeah, I think maybe one idea would just be to come back to that idea of the church being universal more often. Just getting the faithful out of their American funk. I love America. I'm extremely patriotic, but remembering that this is not a national church. This is a global church. And just, even things like, watching videos of how the liturgy is done in Africa and learning about different faith traditions in other countries. I think things as simple as that would be a way to kind of pull ourselves out of ourselves and realize that our faith is so much bigger than our political landscape in the United States in 2018. Because, even the political landscape in the United States is going to be different next year than it is this year. And we just can't get bogged down with all the little things that are changing every day.
Yeah, and I think, again, I feel like I just keep repeating myself, but it also helps to if we were to just step back and just kind of let go of our anger towards each other and be willing to think the best of people, even if we were to disagree. What are some, I'm trying to think, what's something that's contentious? Like Black Lives Matter. There's a lot of contention surrounding that. So, maybe on the one side you have people that step back and say, well, I can understand why they come from where they come from. Not that long ago, African Americans were, having police dogs being let loose on them, and they have all of these issues that I can't understand because I'm not in that community. And then on the other side, people that say, well, this is where they're coming from and I can't understand that, but I'm going to try.
Right.
Let's just try to understand each other, try to have some empathy. Yeah. Even if you don't agree, just try to see where they're coming from. Yeah. Because I feel like if we could just do that, we'd be able to have more agreements and less anger towards each other.
I agree. I spend like half of my reading time reading people that I don't agree with, just to understand where they're coming from. I read like radical feminists and Black Lives Matter writers and people who oppose Trump on either political side. Like I think we have to understand where the other person is coming from. They may be wrong, and their rationale for their position may be, based on revisionist history or a misinterpretation of what our side believes politically or faith-wise. But I don't know if we can really enter into a dialogue and have compassion for one another if we don't really understand what their stated rationale is for what they believe. We can't just assume that people are basing their beliefs out of hatred for the other side. Like, there might be a rationale that's right or wrong, but we have to know what it is in order to have that conversation.
I mean, really, what's the worst case scenario here? Someone that disagrees with you. Mm-hmm. They're completely, let's say that you're right. You're right. They are completely and 100% wrong. Mm-hmm. And everything that you think and believe is right, and they're wrong. Well, then that's the worst of it. They're mistaken.
Right.
They're not evil. They're not bad people. They're mistaken. That's the worst case scenario. That's literally the worst case scenario, is that someone is mistaken. Yeah. And we're going to rake each other across the coals because of this?
Yeah. And I mean, let's ask each other questions, and let's sit there and actually listen to what the other side has to say before we jump in. And I'm preaching to myself, to the choir of me right now, because I'm definitely the person that wants to like jump into the argument and not hear what anyone else is saying and tell everyone what I think. Like, I'll be the first to admit that that is my natural like personality tendency or whatever. But it has been really helpful to just like take a step back. And if I can't like dialogue with that person directly, like read the book, I'll try to read the books that they read, or like understand the political party that they align with, just so that I can know what's kind of like where are they coming from, so that we can have this conversation. Because we really cannot have a conversation with someone that we know nothing about.
Right. And we really have to try to do these things because we're supposed to be part of the universal church. Mm-hmm. Exactly. We're supposed to be part of one family, and we can't have these divisions going on. So when we're at mass, we can't be screaming, about our politics, or, preferably not talking about politics from the pulpit. Yeah. But, yeah. Because isn't that its own issue, right? Because they're supposed to be talking about the readings. Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe you can kind of shed some more light on this, but I don't think that priests are supposed to be getting up there just talking about whatever they want, right? They're supposed to be discussing the readings.
Yeah, the homily is definitely supposed to allude to and expand on the readings. It's okay to bring in doctrine and teaching and talk about the issues that are pertinent to that congregation and at that time. But it's all supposed to come through the lens of what that scripture is teaching us for that day. And Catholics already have a bad enough reputation for not knowing what's in the Bible, even though we read like tons of the Bible every single week at Mass. Like, let's not exacerbate that problem by like not even talking about the scripture in the homily.
I always love that when Protestants are like, oh, well, Catholics don't read the Bible. Well... We actually have several readings every week, and we
actually have the whole Bible.
Yeah, and it's one thing I don't get is like a lot of the Protestant churches I've been to, a lot of the pastors just kind of like verse drop. Mm-hmm. It's just like one individual like verse.
Yeah,
and I'm like, okay, well, there's no context there. So you have no idea what you're talking about.
Exactly. I know that's the beauty of the Catholic liturgy is you really get, if you go to mass every day for like, 3 years, like you hear the whole Bible, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we get the context in there.
And that's what we miss if we're getting wrapped up in politics. And it's unfortunate because politics, like you said at the beginning, it already consumes so much of our life every single day. And it would be really nice if we had this 1 hour where, hey, maybe we could take a step away from politics and focus on, our faith. Yes. And not thinking the worst of each other and not looking at everything through the lens of a, Democrat or Republican or liberal or conservative, because God is above all of that.
Yes.
Like God's not a liberal. He's not a conservative.
And he's omniscient. Like we have to acknowledge that no matter how much we study or try to understand any of these issues, no one of us, priest, bishop, layperson, is ever going to have the full picture. And this is, I guess I'll just sidebar here. This is why I tend to defer or not argue with Pope Francis or call him out when I think that he's being too political or something. Because of all the lay people or clergy in the world, he probably has the most global perspective of anyone on earth. This is the one guy who actually is in touch with people in every single country of the world, who's seen how every single government system works, who knows the problems and the sufferings of every people. So it's easy to read him and just be oh, he's a lefty. I'm going to discard him if I'm a conservative. But I always try to really study what he says and take it to heart, even if my initial reaction is I don't know, Pope Francis, because he has such a perspective that really no other person in the US or world leader really has. The Pope has such a unique perspective, especially in 2018 when we have world travel and the ability, he's probably having Skype meetings with people in other countries that we'll never get a glimpse into their culture or anything. So just kind of a sidebar on the global thing that.
No, I think that's a good point too. And actually it kind of brings up exactly what we're talking about, because even with something like Pope Francis, I really feel like your thoughts on him really depend on the outlet that you read him through. Because even then,
yes,
it cracks me up a lot of the time because, you can read it through one outlet, say the mainstream media, and this is not a political thing. This is just in general.
Yeah.
The Catholic Church is not popular. So remember when Pope Francis, initially became Pope, there was all of this, oh, well, now the Catholic Church is finally going to accept abortion. Yeah. And we're going to have women priests and gay marriage. Yeah. And none of that came to pass. But the reason that I mentioned that is because there were all of these media outlets that were kind of misinterpreting his quotes or twisting them around or taking them out of context to specifically send across a certain message. Mm-hmm. So it really depends on who you read him through also, because he might have been saying something completely different than what it sounds like, because that would cut out everything that came before or after.
Yeah, and the mainstream media will take him out of context for anything he says that's remotely left sounding. So they'll say, oh, Pope Francis is condemning Catholics who don't accept gay marriage, which is totally false, but they'll pull out this one sentence. But then you'll have people on the other side at Church Militant or whatever that are saying oh, Pope Francis is the Antichrist, for the same reason that CNN is praising him. Meanwhile, no one has read the actual statement that Pope Francis made that someone pulled one sentence out of. I saw an article about his encyclical Laudato Si, the one on the stewardship of the environment. An article 1 hour after Laudato Si dropped, there was an article that aggregated every single thing that they thought was heretical about Laudato Si. Here's the interesting thing. Laudato Si is 75 pages long. So it was physically impossible for this person to have read Laudato Si before writing an article about all the quote unquote heresies in the encyclical. But that just goes to show you that so many outlets are working from an agenda that's not really rooted in what is Catholic teaching. It's rooted in what's my political leaning. Right. So, one outlet that was recommended to me, I asked a friend, I was really distraught by kind of like how Pope Francis is being seen through these two lenses, and there doesn't seem to be anyone that's just taking what he says and reporting on it. And my friend recommended Catholic Herald, and I think he recommended CNA, the Catholic News Agency. Those seem to be two outlets that are just reporting on what he says without the spin, to the best of their ability in the English language. Another problem is that Pope Francis, a lot of what he says is not translated into English, so we're kind of left with these snippets and can't get the context unless we can read Italian. But those are two places. Right? What's that?
He doesn't speak English well, right? Like he speaks it, but he doesn't speak it like very well. Right?
So. Yeah, I mean, I think most of what we see from him in English is just translated from Italian or Spanish. Yeah.
Right. So when there's all of this reaction, that's kind of like, well, you're getting it secondhand, and it's being translated, and it's then being taken out of context, and then it's being twisted around.
And then that one line is being put into the headline, and the headline is all that people are reading. Like they're not even clicking to read a couple of sentences. Like they're getting headlines.
Yeah. So I mean, when it comes to Pope Francis, I see a lot of reactions. Yeah. That's something for people to keep in mind.
Yeah. And the Pope can have opinions too. Like it's okay if the Pope says something you don't agree with. It doesn't mean he's the Antichrist.
Oh my gosh, I know, the Antichrist Pope. I see that all the time, and I'm just like, I mean, one thing that cracks me up is that I see so many people, because like I said, I tend to lean more conservative. So a lot of the people that I have on my Facebook page tend to be conservative. And I see so many people that will sit there and they'll find whatever it is that like Huffington Post or whoever wrote about Pope Francis. And they're like, oh, he's terrible. He's the Antichrist. He's the liberal commie Pope.
Right.
And I'm like, you are the people that will sit there and say, we can't trust the media ever, that they're a bunch of liars. But they say this about Pope Francis and suddenly it must be true.
Mm-hmm. Because it fits your preconceived idea of what Pope Francis is.
Right. Yeah. And that's it. That kind of circles back to everything that we're talking about. Like we all have these preconceived notions that we just have to let go of. Mm-hmm. And, you're allowed to disagree with some of the things that Pope Francis says. It doesn't make him an evil person. You're allowed to disagree with what your priest says or the person sitting next to you in the pew. Yeah. It doesn't mean that they're less Catholic than you. It means that they disagree with you. And that's all that it is.
Yeah. Yeah. As long as we're on the same page about doctrine, then we can have a variety of opinions. And not only that, but it's a good thing. Opinions are a good thing because that really is what gives rise to doctrines being pronounced and the church expanding on things that we're confused about. So the conversation is good. It's just a matter of not tearing each other apart, listen to each other, and don't assume that someone is a horrible Catholic, like you said, just because they have a different opinion from you.
Yeah. I think that just about covers it for today. Was there anything else that you wanted to add?
I think I got it all out.
Okay, well, that's it for us today. I hope you will join us next week. Make sure to check us out on Twitter at Fidelis Women. For Lauren and myself, thank you for joining us and have a great day.